Good afternoon, Chicago. I'm Sasha-Ann Simons, and this is Reset. As you've been hearing on WBEZ, the 45th president of the United States will also be our 47th president. Donald Trump crossed the 270 electoral vote threshold this morning when he won the battleground state of Wisconsin. He's now the president-elect. Before that, in the middle of the night, Trump spoke to his supporters.
This is a magnificent victory for the American people that will allow us to make America great again.
A handful of states have yet to be called in the presidential race as some votes continue to be counted. Meanwhile, many local results are in for Congress, Cook County State's Attorney, Chicago's first elected school board seats, and more. This hour, we'll dig into the presidential race, the national picture, what happened in our area, and what it all means for you. And joining us for the hour to dig into what we know and what we don't know is a panel of political experts. Democratic strategist Delmarie Cobb, Northwestern University professor Jaime Dominguez, and former chairman for the Illinois Republican Party, Pat Brady. Welcome to you all.
Thank you.
Great to
Appreciate it.
So I got to hear it. Let's start off with your reactions. Did you predict this or not, Delmarie?
Well, I've said from the very beginning that it would be very hard for a black woman to become president of the United States. And of course, we saw that with Hillary Clinton, who was the most connected, most well-known, most experienced woman candidate we could ever have, woman or man.
Yeah.
And we saw how difficult it was for her. Now add on a person of color, and specifically a black woman, and it's going to be even more difficult.
Yeah.
And so I've had text messages all day today saying, you said this, we were hoping you weren't telling the truth so that we could gloat. But no,
sounds like you might have been right.
It's a reality.
Jaime?
Wow, I don't know where to begin. But I will say that I think the fact that he was able to convince the majority of the voters that he was persecuted in a lot of ways and not prosecuted, and that he's actually the victim and not the perpetrator. I think that resonated. We saw that last night. I think also the issue of reproductive rights and abortion wasn't as a defining issue as perhaps Kamala Harris and Democrats thought it would be. Not to say that it wasn't important, but it wasn't enough to tip the scale in Kamala Harris's favor. And lastly, I would just say that I was not surprised, but the ways in which Trump was able to and continues to kind of diversify and expand his electoral coalition, which was, white working class, non-college voters, to now make inroads, for example, with Latino voters, particularly men. So
we'll
to
dig
make
into
that
that.
distinction, right? It's men, not women so much. But still, the fact that he was able to do that successfully presents opportunities for the Republican Party, but also challenges as well.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. Did you see a Trump victory coming, Pat?
I did not see a Trump victory coming. I thought it was too close to call, but I did think it was going to break one way or another, as it did, even though it was within the margins within the states. But I thought one would run the table as President Trump did. And early on, when I saw the exit polls in Georgia, where I saw that independents were breaking for Trump by 11 or 12 points, that it's probably going to be a rough night. That being said, I do agree with what Jaime said, that love or hate Trump, he has expanded the tent within the Republican Party, which I've been talking about for years, to get people that aren't just white males, to get more people of color. Not great numbers, but numbers that were better.
Yeah.
And the reality is this was a resounding victory.
He won the electoral vote. He's well ahead in the popular vote with about 90% of total votes counted. I mean, what do you think gave him the edge over Kamala Harris?
I believe that I was in Arizona 2 weekends ago, and I watched commercials all weekend, all the commercials, because that was a swing state. And not opining on the message itself, but he had a better message. His commercials were, I'm going to do economy, immigration, make America great again, over and over and over. And she did not have a good political message, I think, that resonated. And as Jaime, I think Delmarie might have said too, abortion just wasn't the issue that people thought it was going to be. And he made an argument, I think, that assuaged some women that, hey, this is up to the states and blah, blah, blah. Whether you agree or disagree, I just think he had a better message.
For weeks, we've been hearing that the presidential race was a toss-up, especially in those 7 battleground states, Jaime. What happened overall?
I I think that the polls just didn't capture perhaps the sentiment in I would say in states outside of perhaps Michigan.
Why do we still trust polls?
Well, at least it gives us.
It's
You're
like
right.
Charlie Brown, the football.
Right. Well, it gives us at least some sense of where perhaps the ball is at on the field. But again, it's never definitive. They've been wrong a lot, and they will continue to be. But nevertheless, I think allows the campaigns to kind of figure out how to utilize their resources, how to if their messaging is correct. So I think that Trump was able to, and his campaign was able to just make the case, right, that on the economy and immigration.
Delmarie, Harris raised $1 billion for her campaign. Trump had $388 million. I mean, she clearly had the bigger war chest. So what went wrong?
Well, she ran a flawless campaign. I mean, just because she didn't win didn't mean it wasn't
short
a great
campaign.
And it was a 100-day campaign. And she did all the things right that you needed to do to have an organized campaign, field operation, all of those things. I mean, part of the problem is he has a cult following. They're self-motivated. They don't need him to motivate them. They're going to motivate themselves. They're going to knock on doors. They're going to talk to their family. They're going to put up signs. They're going to do whatever they have to do to help him win, just like they came out January 6th because he asked them to. So when you have that, that's a very different kind of base. You don't have to buy those voters. Those voters buy themselves.
Mm. So what do you think is on the minds today of the Democratic Party?
Well, I mean,
because the strategy didn't work.
Well, and who knows if Joe Biden had stayed in there, what would have happened? I mean, if you look at the numbers, everywhere she overperformed. I mean, she underperformed Joe Biden in almost every aspect, even with women. I mean, she got 10% of the women's vote in terms of over Donald Trump. Biden got 15% of the women vote. So in every aspect, she underperformed. And again, we can look at everything and we can tear it apart. But the most important factor in this race is the fact that she was a woman and she was a black woman.
Last night, WBEZ city government and politics reporter Tessa Weinberg was at a Harris watch party with the Illinois Democratic Party. So let's check back in with her right now. Hey, Tessa.
Hey, how's it going?
Going well. Now, I remember last night as results were coming in and it looked less likely that Harris would win. We were talking at that time and you said, folks were still, optimistic. But talk more about the scene last night with the Illinois Democrats.
Yeah, the watch party was already starting to thin out before we saw any swing states called. So at no point did it feel really, doom and gloom just because it was still so early in the night and things were still really up in the air, although it was leaning towards Trump at that point. The party was already starting to dwindle around 10 p.m. You could see people still kind of anxiously watching the results. But really throughout the night, Illinois Democrats were still holding out. Top Illinois Dems made appearances like Senator Dick Durbin, Lieutenant Governor Juliana Stratton, and Attorney General Kwame Raoul. And they were all saying, they were still feeling positive. They were cautiously optimistic, even as they acknowledged it would be a close race. And they were personally expressing disbelief that it would be. Mm-hmm. And I think, overall, most of the folks there weren't expecting that we would know the results right away. They were really cautioning it's going to be a long night. And Senator Dick Durbin said, keep your fingers crossed. This is what they make rosaries for.
Was anybody talking about what might have been going wrong or what happens next?
Not quite yet. There was no, postmortem quite happening last night. They weren't quite yet embracing a Trump victory, but they were acknowledging there would be challenges to come under a Trump presidency. Senator Dick Durbin said, regardless of who wins, that the next president faces a really dramatic challenge of trying to unite a divided country. Yeah. He referenced past moments in history like World War II as a major event that helped to bring the country together, and saying he hopes it doesn't take something like that for this divided United States to maybe unite a little bit. And Attorney General Kwame Raoul, he was saying he anticipates his office will be extremely busy under a Trump presidency, noting Democratic attorneys general across the country push back on policies in Trump's first term, and that he's been preparing for that under a second Trump presidency.
What could a Trump presidency mean for Chicago, Tessa? Because looking back at Trump's first term, that administration in Chicago, there wasn't a good relationship there.
Right. Yeah. I would expect Chicago, a city run by a Democratic mayor who, campaigned hard for Harris, to really be pushing back against policies from a Trump White House. Mayor Brandon Johnson, has been very vocal about his feelings about Trump. He recently said, is there a stronger word for insanity? Yes, it's Trump. And Trump's, current campaign platform does, put cities like Chicago in its crosshairs. He's vowed to cut federal funding to sanctuary cities, and Mayor Johnson has said the city has to take those threats seriously. One alderperson I spoke to already today, Alderman Nick Sposato, he voted for Trump and supported him, but he was saying he does hope Trump will kind of welcome everyone into the tent and still show support for blue cities like Chicago.
Mm. Well, we'll leave it there. That's WBEZ City Politics reporter Tessa Weinberg. Thanks for checking in.
Thanks so much for having me.
Democratic strategist Delmarie Cobb, Northwestern University professor Jaime Dominguez, and former chairman for the Illinois Republican Party, Pat Brady, are still here with us. So there are a lot of theories swirling around what really caused Harris to lose to Donald Trump. I know you talked a lot, Delmarie, about just the fact that she's a woman, right? And we've been hearing a lot of conversation about that. And some people are pointing the finger at certain demographics who are responsible for not getting her in office, and not simply just a difference in their two policies, right? Some are saying white women are to blame. They had a large support thrown behind Donald Trump. Some are focused on a big shift in the Latino vote, right? There's a lot of, especially if you go on social media, you see a lot of conversations about that. And this is even after Trump's comments on immigration, the floating garbage remarks, right? And then there was also a small shift of black voters in some of these swing states that we've been talking about. Jaime, why do you think that Trump resonates with these groups?
I think
and continues to resonate with them despite what he does.
Yeah, for sure. I think it has to do with the fact that, again, it was about the economic message. With respect to the Latino collective, I think the fact that a disproportionate number of Latinos in the United States are working class or middle class. And so to them, when they think of the word inflation, just like a lot of other Americans, they think of it in the immediate in terms of going to the high grocery prices, high gas prices, high rents. And so to them, it's immediate. And I don't think there was the patience to wait another 4 years to see if the economy does turn around, even though it was.
Yeah.
The economy is getting stronger. Even the Wall Street Journal put out an editorial last week saying that whoever wins is going to have a strong economy to work with. And so I think that had a lot to do with how he was able to create inroads with Latino, and particularly Latino men, not so much women. But also, I think, going back real quickly to the reproductive rights and abortion, it's interesting to me how Donald Trump was able to carry, even by double digits, states where abortion rights was on the ballot, and it won overwhelmingly. You look at Florida, right? 57% voted to keep abortion as a right. Montana, Nebraska, Missouri. And so I think all those percolating factors really played into the psyche, I think, of perhaps voters who would kind of push back with respect to what the actual Trump campaign was saying about perhaps their community, right? In terms of demonizing, of relegating certain subsets of a population to kind of the dungeons of irrelevance, et cetera. At the end of the day, I think it was about messaging, but the messaging was tangible.
So we hosted a call-in show earlier this morning on WBEZ, and I want to play a little bit of what we heard from listener Francisco on the southeast side.
My community, I'm a Latino. I'm used to my community being scapegoated by Donald Trump, but now I'm hearing that a lot of pundits say Latinos are responsible for Kamala Harris losing, and hearing it from both sides of the aisle is miserable. We're trying out here, and to hear the punditry say that Latinos are to blame is a mistake.
So, Delmarie, are we seeing the pitfalls of taking votes for granted, or of seeing Latinos and Black voters as one voting bloc, rather than a diverse group of voters with varying interests and needs?
In fact, we were talking about that earlier because I
actually even hate saying Latino vote.
Right.
What does that mean?
Exactly.
Well, we have to look at it very differently. I always say in terms of not only Latinos, but immigrants, period, all immigrants.
Right.
They come to America for a better life. That's why they're here. African Americans were brought here so everybody else could have a better life. So our perspective on things is totally different. And we don't expect to assimilate. We don't expect to be accepted because we know we're not going to be accepted because of the color of our skin. We'll be tolerated. We're not going to ever be accepted. So if your goal is to be accepted, if your goal is to assimilate in order to have a good life, and you think that that's all equal, then you're going to look at the world differently. You're going to associate with who you think is powerful. And that's who you're going to align yourself with, those in power. That's not how Black people tend to look at the world.
Now, our caller, Francisco, also said that Harris, quote, tracked to the center. She tried to court Republicans, end quote. Pat, do you think that Harris veered to the right? And did that cost Democrats the election?
I missed that if she did. I don't know what particular issue she veered to the right on. She did pull back on some of her issues like fracking and some things like that. But I don't think she really did. Again, back to, and Jaime, I think you're touching on it insofar as the different constituencies. I think people, particularly in the Latino community, which is not one group, it can be 11 or 12 different groups from Cubans to whatever, they vote their pocketbooks. They vote their own interests. And even in the African-American community, this immigration issue has created a real rift.
Yeah.
The people are coming here and getting $1,400 in hotels, and they're African-Americans are like, wait a minute, we've been here, like you just said, a long time, and where are we not getting ours? The point is it just created a whole bunch of rifts. I think one thing that might have been a little underestimated too, not that it's a big group, but this issue in Israel. I mean, that kind of split a constituency of the Democratic Party, not a huge one, but in a state like Michigan that they needed. So I think there were a lot of forces pulling it apart. But to your caller's point, maybe the Latino, and I hate saying that too because it's not one group, maybe they're just voting economic interests versus any other interests they might have, which most people do vote on. And I think that's where Trump just, whether you agree or disagree, like or dislike, he just had a better message on the economy and immigration and inflation and things that people really care about.
Now, this morning, we took your calls about the presidential results and what you think needs to happen next in national politics. Here's what some of you had to say.
I think that Donald Trump has announced he wanted to be a king or a dictator from the first day, and I think he means it.
I'm, of course, extremely sad about the results, but there's also something worthwhile to me in knowing that there is a trend. I'm unhappy with the trend. We clearly lost, but at least we know where we are going forward.
How a person who is a convicted felon is allowed to become president of the United States when America says it's a country of law and order.
I'm an Air Force veteran, and I'm very hopeful for President Trump. Even if Kamala would have won, I would also be very hopeful for her because I believe they both have good intentions, and that's the main thing. They care about America.
I strongly believe that the Biden administration's failure to gain control of the border far sooner than they did was probably the leading factor in this dramatic defeat of Kamala Harris. This is deja vu like I never wanted to see again.
That was John from Edgewater, Lawrence, Patrick, Rona from Lakeview, and Llewellyn from Evanston. Thank you to everyone who called in live earlier this morning and those of you who left us a voice message. If you would still like to share your thoughts, leave us a message at 888-915-9945. That's 888-915-9945. Let's take a quick pause right here. There's more Reset in just a moment. And we're back now with more Reset. I'm your host, Sasha-Ann Simons. This hour, we are unpacking the election results with a panel of political experts. Democratic strategist Del Marie Cobb, former chairman of the Illinois Republican Party, Pat Brady, and political science professor at Northwestern University, Jaime Dominguez. Also on the line with us is WBEZ criminal justice reporter Chip Mitchell. Chip's been following another local and major race here the race for Cook County State's attorney. Democrat and Judge Eileen O'Neill Burke handily won her bid to take over for outgoing state's attorney Kim Foxx, beating Republican Bob Fioretti. Now, Chip Mitchell was at O'Neill Burke's campaign watch party last night. Hey, Chip. Have you recovered?
Hey, Sasha. I am doing fine, yes.
Yeah. Did you get to hear those bagpipers that you were waiting for last night?
Yeah, a whole line of them. This was a band of current and retired Chicago cops, all in kilts, and they marched right past me. I did have to grab my headphones to block out the high notes. It was funny.
I bet. Well, Eileen O'Neill Burke will be Cook County's next top prosecutor. So, real quick, what do people need to know about her? How does she compare to Kim Foxx? That's the big question.
Yeah, well, Fox is the outgoing state's attorney. She decided to step down after 8 years. One policy that Fox was set, that a change that she made in the office, was to charge most retail theft under $1,000 to charge that as a misdemeanor instead of a felony. Fox said it was partly to free up resources to prosecute violent crimes. But O'Neill Burke, she's promised to scrap that policy and return to prosecuting retail theft as low as $300 as a felony, as state law allows. So there are other stuff. There's other stuff like O'Neill Burke. She says she'll seek pretrial detention in more types of cases. So, for example, when there's a charge of possessing an assault weapon or charge of violent crime on the CTA, she's promising to seek pretrial detention, and that's a matter of discretion for the prosecutors. That said, after the March primary, Sasha, so unlike yesterday's general election, she won the primary by a razor-thin margin. It took 10 days to find out who the winner was. She's eased up on criticizing Fox ever since then. So she's embraced and talked up some steps by Fox, like restorative justice courts. O'Neill Burke also says she supports, this is something else that Fox has championed, Illinois' elimination of cash bail last year. She talks up the fairness of getting rid of money in decisions on whether to hold defendants in jail.
And at the same time, O'Neill Burke, I mean, she's never identified herself as a progressive prosecutor like Fox has, right?
No, she has not. She won that March primary against Clayton Harris III, basically by painting him as a Fox clone and by promising more law and order. A few days before the primary, she even won the endorsement of the local Fraternal Order of Police, the union for Chicago cops, and that's where that's the energy that we get the bagpipes from. That union's president urged his Republican members to cross over and vote in the Democratic race for O'Neill Burke. So that may have made a difference when we're talking about just dozens or scores or a few hundred votes separating the two, the two Democrats that were neck and neck in that primary. O'Neill Burke disavowed that endorsement, but there's no hiding the dynamics here. A lot of law enforcement and business interests are thrilled she's taking over. She speaks nostalgically about attorneys back in the 1990s. That's when she cut her teeth in the legal world as a prosecutor, and when there were a lot of wrongful convictions back then. And Chicago and Cook County are still dealing with those wrongful convictions, and they're very expensive. And people have been some of them in prison for decades. And those are cases that went through the court system in the 1990s. O'Neill Burke herself was involved with a story that we first reported on in the campaign, the prosecution of an 11-year-old for a murder that that case was eventually dropped, and she's never really talked about what she did wrong in that case and what she would do differently. So she has a long way to go to establish widespread trust on the South and West sides. Jesse Jackson Sr., he even endorsed Bob Fioretti, the Republican, in this general election. So on the South and West side, some mostly black suburbs, these are precisely the places where some of the worst gun violence is taking place. The violence that O'Neill Burke is talking about tamping down, she's got a long way to go to build bridges and establish trust, Sasha.
Sounds like it. Well, that's WBEZ criminal justice reporter Chip Mitchell about the race for Cook County State's attorney. Now, Reset's going to break down more results from other races like the elected school board in Chicago and referenda on Illinois ballots tomorrow on the show. Thanks, Chip.
My pleasure.
All right, so speaking of the Cook County State's Attorney race, Republican Bob Fioretti conceded the race, but he did take some credit last night for elevating Republicans here. He said, quote, "One thing we've established here in Cook County is we have a new Republican Party. We have a bench. We have people ready to step up." Pat, your reaction to Fioretti's take here?
Bob's a former Democrat and perennial candidate, and I like Bobby as a friend, but I don't know if he's the person to be addressing that. But the Republicans did do better in suburban Cook and in the city. Well, in fact, I think Trump only lost the state by 4 points.
Yeah, he did.
And he typically loses by 16 or 17, kind of Darren Bailey. So yeah, there could be an opportunity here. But I got to step back and talk about the previous report on Eileen Burke. Eileen Burke's my era in the state's attorney's office, and I think the suggestion that somehow she's wrapped up in some of the things that happened in the 70s, in the 80s, the Burrs and some of those things, I think is a little bit unfair. And I think then he talked about building trust within the community. Kim Foxx was a disaster as a prosecutor. She didn't take care of the victims. She didn't prosecute crimes that needed to be prosecuted. She devastated the office. There are 250 state's attorneys down. When I interviewed in that office, that was one of the best prosecutors' offices in the country. And we need that office. I get the history, and she does have to build bridges and do it fairly. But to suggest somehow that she's some product of a corrupt system where she was with the police that were beating confessions out of people, I think that is not fair to her at all. And I think it was very unfair of Kim Foxx to run for 8 years on the platform that the police are bad and that their job is mainly beating confessions out of people. If that were the case, she did not convict one officer in her 8 years of being in there of that kind of misconduct. There was other misconduct. I'm not saying the police were perfect, but the pendulum went too far to the left. We're going to have a Democrat state's attorney, but I think we need to return to law and order. We need to start focusing on victims. And when he talks about the South and West Side, those are the people that are the most victimized by this crime. And I think if you talk to the working people in those communities, they're going to welcome maybe putting these bad guys behind bars.
Before the break, we heard from WBEZ reporter Tessa Weinberg about what a Trump presidency could mean for Chicago. So I want to widen the lens a bit for Illinois. Governor Pritzker has been vocal against Trump on pretty much every issue, right? The economy, women's rights, LGBTQ rights, immigration, you name it. Are we in for a contentious 4 years, Jaime, between the state and the federal government?
I think it all depends on the way in which the Trump administration carries out their policies. So, for example, I'm thinking of, sanctuary cities, Chicago being a hub of historically immigrants, and his platform to get tough on immigrants and connecting them to crime. And so the extent to which he goes about applying that in various jurisdictions across the country, I think it's going to determine whether or not it's amicable or it's just very fraught. I think also this idea of the mass deportation program, the largest that we're ever going to see, that's what him and J.D. Vance were saying. I think that's a huge logistical organizational nightmare. And I think that they have to tread very carefully on that as well. Because I'm thinking also, we're talking earlier about the ways in which they made inroads gradually with Latino voters, particularly Latino men. What we do know about Latinos in the issue of immigration, they do care about it. But in polls after polls, we did one Northwestern last year during the mayor's race, and one of the questions we asked was, how do voters want to see immigration kind of implemented and across the board, regardless of race, income, location of the city, they wanted it done in a humane and orderly way. So I think that they have to tread very carefully because these gains could actually turn into losses going forward, not just in presidential elections, but just down ballot races, right? Whether it's local, state, county, et cetera.
Del Marie, during the last Trump term, if you can think back, Illinois lawmakers, they shored up their power and progressive protections here in the state. Do you think they'll use the same strategy during a second Trump term?
Well, they're going to have to protect a lot of the things that we as voters here in Illinois hold dear. We talk about we only won Illinois by 4 points this time, but we still won. And we're still the only blue state in a sea of red, just like we were in 2016, which I take great respect for, because if I wouldn't live in any one of these other states, because the idea of living in these kinds of extreme states, to me, would be just, I just can't even imagine it. But Illinois is becoming more extreme. We see that with the Darren Baileys and others who think that they need to identify with Trump. So we're going to see more of that. So yes, Illinois will have to enshrine a lot of its progressive beliefs.
Now, on the line with us is Illinois State Board of Election Public Information Officer Matt Dietrich. Let's check in with him. Hey, Matt.
Hi.
How was turnout yesterday, and how does it compare to previous election years?
Well, it's hard to get for us here at the state level a very accurate picture. We don't really deal in unofficial numbers, but I've taken a look around at some of the county websites where they've posted their turnout, and if you take the top 10 largest jurisdictions in Illinois, which cover 70% of the electorate, we're probably looking at a turnout of somewhere close to 70%. Now, that would be less than what we saw 4 years ago. 4 years ago, we had a 73% statewide turnout, and it was the largest since 1992. So in 2016, we had a 71% turnout. I think we'll probably end up somewhere closer to there. The biggest turnout seemed to be in a few of the collar counties. DuPage, Kane, and Will all hit that 73% mark, which is really strong.
Interesting.
Cook is at 63%, and the city of Chicago was only at 58%.
Yeah.
Now, those numbers are going to get goosed up a little bit because you still have, statewide, we still have more than 400,000 vote-by-mail ballots that potentially could come back and be voted. So those turnout numbers might go up, by percentages of a percent, but they're not going to. They're probably going to stay pretty consistent.
And Matt, what do we know about the demographics of people who cast their ballots?
We don't know that yet. We can't compute that here until we get the results from the local jurisdictions. And we don't even start doing that until 2 weeks from today, when all of the locals have completed, they finished up with their vote by mail. They've adjudicated all of their provisional ballots. They have until November 19th to do that. And then we start receiving their data, and then, of course, we certify the statewide ballot on December 2nd. So we're not going to really know for sure what the turnout was statewide until December 2nd.
That's Matt Dietrich from the Illinois State Board of Elections. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Let's hear more of your thoughts about the presidential election.
I think the Democratic Party really needs to realize, their message is just not resonating with voters, and they need to do some soul searching and find out what is going to resonate.
I am ecstatic about this election. Finally, the fear-mongering from the left can be over. Our borders will be secure, and we will all reap the benefits.
As an African-American man, I will be deeply affected by what Donald Trump does. My community will be deeply affected. To those who are part of my community, join a group, join an affinity group. I don't care what it is.
I knew it would be a close election, but I think it's scary to see how many gains Trump made, and we need to pay attention to those voters who voted for him and why.
Misinformation was the top reason that I think he was able to get into office, and invoking all of those emotional responses from his voters using whatever language he could was kind of fascinating. Telling everybody that, illegal immigrants are getting transgender operations in prison. People bought it.
I am perplexed that electorate of the United States would even consider voting for a liar, a cheater, a thief.
I do believe that until we have two females running the way that Mexico did, and they elected their first female, I think that's what will happen here. And I hope I live to see it, and I wish the best to my daughter for the challenges ahead.
That was Amy from Mount Prospect, Brian from Old Irving Park, Colin from Oak Forest, Allison from Oak Park, David from the northwest suburbs, Jared and Dylan from Elk Grove. Thank you to everyone who called in live earlier this morning on WBEZ, and those of you who left us voice messages. You can still leave us messages at 888-915-9945. Up next, what should we expect in the first 100 days of the Trump administration? And what does the Democratic Party need to do to reach more voters? That's just ahead on the program. This is Reset. I'm Sasha-Ann Simons. All hour, we have been breaking down the results of the presidential election and local races with Democratic strategist Delmarie Cobb, former chairman of the Illinois Republican Party, Pat Brady, and political science professor at Northwestern University, Jaime Dominguez. We are joined now by Aaron Del Mar. He was a Republican delegate at this summer's convention and the Palatine Township Republican chairman. Welcome back.
Hey, how's it going? Happy afternoon.
Happy afternoon to you, Aaron. I mean, what did you think that it was that convinced voters to get Trump back in office? Policy?
I think it was.
Persona?
I think it was a lot of things. I think there was a lot of. Well, first of all, I think they ran a very disciplined campaign compared to what they did in 2020, and significantly more than they did in 2016. I think their messaging was on target. It was pointed, and they ran a very disciplined program and ground game in the swing states. And I think you're seeing the fruits of the labor in each of these swing states because it looks like he's going to run the table on all 7. I think that's number one. Number two, I think that Kamala Harris was handicapped in the fact that she had to put together a campaign in such a short amount of time. She never really got to introduce herself to the electorate. I think there were some hard feelings within the Democratic Party that, there was no primary and they didn't get an opportunity to voice their thoughts on different candidates, and it was kind of jammed through in a very short amount of time. But I can tell you, if you look at the Illinois results, 700,000 Democrats stayed at home in 2024 compared to 4 years ago. And I think that is a big telling story. You had another 100,000 Republicans that came out. And, when you're looking at the polls that are coming in, and certainly there's some more absentees that are out there, but Cook County and the city of Chicago, Donald Trump got almost 38%. That should never happen in a heavily blue progressive city that elected Mayor Brennan Johnson.
Right. Now, here's the thing. We talked to you in the summer, Aaron, and you said at the time, you and many other Republicans, you were willing to look past the fact that the former president is a convicted felon. Why is that? Because many Democrats and many political analysts, they thought that his conviction, that would be the thing to drive voters away.
I think that actually backfired him. I think when he kind of controlled the narrative and said that, hey, I'm being persecuted by the government, we're going to be this banana republic. If it's true or not true, I think that resonated with a lot of white, non-college educated voters. I think that resonated with groups, the Hispanic community and the African American community. If you saw in every swing state, if you look in Pennsylvania and in Michigan, he overperformed in the black male community. And that's after a lot of the political rhetoric that he was criticized by the Democrats for being racist, for being misogynistic, but those groups all still came out for him.
The Republican House Speaker Mike Johnson said that Americans should expect an aggressive agenda for the first 100 days, especially if the GOP holds the House. What do you want to see in those first 100 days, Aaron, and how are you hoping it impacts people's lives in your district of Palatine?
Sure. I'm looking for two things. The first side is I would like to see a measured response from our Republican community, the conservative community, on the election victory that we had last night. I think that there are a lot of hard feelings and that we need to be really classy in the way that we accept this victory. That's number one, because people are hurting right now on the other side, and we need to be sensitive to that. For the first 100 days of this administration, I want to see a very strong strategic policy enactment of some of the core principles that Donald Trump talked about during his campaign. I want to see the extension of the 2017 tax cuts. I want to see stronger border security. We want to see stronger national defense. We want to have better relationships with our allies. We want to see more world peace and less loss of life, both in Ukraine and in the Gaza Strip. I know that those are really challenging things that you're going to have to do as a president, but those are the promises that he made. And when he gave his speech last night and he said, hey, the theme of this is going to be promises made, promises kept. I think we as Republicans and as Americans need to hold him accountable for those promises, and I think that he'll create an environment where he can deliver on those.
That's Aaron Del Mar, a Trump delegate and Palatine Township Republican chairman. Thank you so much for checking in.
Thank you so much for your time, and have a great day.
You too. So, Pat, what do you think about what you just heard? That, especially that promises made, promises kept bit, right? I'm glad Aaron reminded us of that bit of Trump's speech last night. But what do you think the GOP under President Trump should prioritize when this administration gets started?
Aaron laid it out well, just that promises, made, promises kept. Like I said, on the tax increases, on the border, I think those are things that he needs to address right away. I don't think he could have said it any better. I'm a little concerned that I saw Steve Bannon, one of the Trump past senior advisors, said that he's threatening to go after the Justice Department and the FBI. I mean, Bannon just got out of jail 10 days ago. So I hope that they put those threats away and govern and do the work of the people. But another point that Aaron made I thought was really important is, don't spike the football. There are 48% of this country feels horrible about the results last night, and treat those people with respect and understand where they are, which I think at 4 o'clock, it's 4 o'clock today, when the vice president makes her concession speech, she needs to speak to her people and say, hey, we need to come together as a country.
Yeah, it'd be 3 p.m. Central Time.
I'm sorry,
3 p.m. Now, what do you think, Del Marie, Jaime, first 100 days, what are you looking for?
Well, if we go by promises made, promises kept, then he made a lot of promises.
That's a tall order.
He made a lot of promises about going after people. He made a lot of promises about deporting, mass immigration, deportation. He's made a lot of promises, and I'm sure he is going to try to keep those. He made promises about dismantling the Affordable Care Act, the same promise he made in 2016 that he has a concept for. So he's made a lot of promises, not all of them good ones. And so it'll be very interesting to see if he goes after his enemies list, which is also a promise. So it's going to be very interesting to watch and see what happens.
Yeah, Jaime, many Democrats are worried Trump will only hire people who will give the president-elect free rein to impose his agenda. So including proposals like mass deportations or using the military inside the U.S. Your thoughts?
Yeah, so I think it's going to depend on, to that point, your point about who he has around him to keep him kind of disciplined and structured. But in terms of things, I'm thinking more like things to stay away from. So Del Marie just mentioned the Affordable Care Act, particularly for Americans. That's huge, particularly for Latino voters. That's huge. That's the largest uninsured group. That matters. I think also to Pat's point about just staying away from the politics of grievance, the politics of retribution. I think that could really backfire on Republicans. And so I think, again, it's going to depend on the extent to which Trump is able to garner support in the House and the Senate to push forward his policies. For example, one thing that I'm curious about is to see how he goes about, his whole position with tariffs, implementing a 20-25% tariffs on imported goods, because there's going to be implications for that in terms of rising prices in our grocery stores. And in fact, that's not quite the opposite of what people want to see. So I'm curious to see how he goes about doing that, but more importantly, the way in which he does so in a kind of structured way, which is a challenge because we have yet to see that. But again, a lot of that's going to determine on the circle that he puts around himself.
Mm. So we got to talk about where the Democratic Party goes next. Del Marie, the coalition VP Harris tried to build, it didn't materialize. What do Democrats need to do to have a wider appeal going forward?
Well, I don't know that it's so much that they didn't have a wider appeal. It's one, this is a cult following, and we have to understand that that is very different than just a regular campaign. Two, Donald Trump, in terms of he lied about everything constantly. I mean, and so a lot of it is every few seconds you're hearing a lie, and people believed it. I mean, intelligent people. I mean, I'm talking to people who should know better, and they're repeating and parroting everything that he's saying, and he's the only one saying it, and they're believing it.
Yeah.
So I mean, that's
but either way, Democrats didn't have the numbers.
No, they didn't have the numbers, but that's part of the reason they didn't have the numbers is because this is a belief system. This becomes a value system, and it's hard. You can't expect Democrats to change the things that are valuable to them just to reach out to a group of people who are following a cult. So we've got to address this whole cult situation. And I think the Republicans will probably address it for us because traditionally, whenever the Republicans win, they wind up going overboard and they read into their win as a mandate. And even though it may be a mandate in numbers, it's not a mandate.
Yeah, like it did in 2016, the so-called blue wall of Rust Belt states, so Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania, fell hard. This time around, Wisconsin and Pennsylvania went to Trump, and so did Michigan, which was officially called while we've been on air just a few minutes ago. What do Democrats need to do to reach voters in those states, Jaime?
I think it has to do with the messaging. I don't think it was the issue of the ground operation. I think that the Democratic Party has a major kind of realignment to deal with respect to perhaps on issues of immigration. It's okay to admit perhaps you weren't as strong as you should have been on the border, but I didn't see that happening. But at the same time, I think they really need to create or reopen those intervals that they have with labor, that they have with unions, that they have with minority voters.
Yeah.
And so, as I said earlier, I think there's challenges and opportunities for perhaps different constituencies that, in this case, the Republican Party made inroads with. But again, the extent to which, and this is a challenge for any candidate that wins office, whether it's local, county, et cetera, the extent to which you're able to successfully transition from an electoral coalition to a successful governing coalition.
Yeah.
So to your point earlier, and my point earlier about that's going to be dependent and incumbent upon the people that he puts himself around to help come to a consensus, a solution that perhaps it's not going to be it's going to resonate with every sector, but at least you try to create a more cohesive kind of messaging around a solution that people can get behind.
Right. We'll have to leave it there. A big thanks to our panel today, Jaime Dominguez from Northwestern University, Democratic strategist Delmarie Cobb, and former head of the Illinois Republican Party, Pat Brady. Thank you all so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Your time.
Of course.
And that's it for Reset. Tomorrow on the show, we're going to continue to pull some of the threads on local races. We're going to take a look at which judges won seats on the bench, what happened with Chicago elected school board positions, and so much more. I'm Sasha-Ann Simons. Thank you for listening today. Have a good one, and we'll meet again tomorrow.